You think you could make it 5 years or so in a Russian prison? I'm Chris Cuomo. Welcome to the Chris Cuomo Project. Paul Whelan went for a wedding to Russia, got scooped up, called a spy, called some kind of, military big shot, and was just held and toyed with. How did he keep his head together? How did he keep himself safe? And imagine what it was like to feel forgotten, to watch a big shot WNBA player who had actually done something wrong, not worthy of being detained the way she was, but Brittany Griner go in, all this media outrage, and her go home, and you still stuck in a work camp, sitting there day after day, week, month, year. You don't speak the language, and you have no idea that the next promise will ever be real. Paul Whelan has not done a lot since he got out. He's home, and he wanted to talk to us and share what it was like, how he handled it, and how he got home, and what you need to know. Paul Whelan, in his own words, right now. Paul Whelan, it is a great honor. I'm so happy that you're home and living your life again. When we got word that you would be part of the swap, August 1st, 2024, it was 8 days before my birthday. And, once you're in your 50s and beyond, you don't really care about your birthdays. But that made it a really special occasion. What does it mean to you to be back in America? Can you believe it all the way through your bones?
Well, Chris, thanks for having me here. It's great to be home. It's great to be in the United States. It's a first world country. We have the best of everything available. There's nothing like this. I'd said that I spent 5.5 years in a third world country, and that's really what it was. So being able to get online and do something like this is incredible. Visiting friends and family, incredible. Just everything I've done in the last couple of months, it's just amazing. It's amazing.
So you remind me, you sound like, remember the Jeffersons TV show? We're moving on up to the east side, to the deluxe apartment in the sky. But it's not just that
deluxe apartment
in the sky. Not only did you get to move to a better place, but you're leaving out the big part. You weren't there by choice. And they were making it really obvious that they wanted you to be a bad guy who was under their control for a long time. How aware were you of the level of animus directed toward you, and what did you think your future was?
Well, interestingly enough, as soon as I was arrested, the FSB told me what they were doing. And they said they wanted, 3 Russians that were in American custody. One had just been arrested for espionage, basically, unregistered foreign agent. And their intent was to get those 3 back for me. The people at the lower end that I was dealing with, obviously they're believing what their people at the top are telling them. They quickly figured out that I wasn't a general and I wasn't a secret agent. But, that's Russia. The people at the bottom are functionaries, and they just did what they were told. So they grabbed me and held me.
What were you doing in Russia? Remind people.
I was in Russia with friends. We'd gone for a wedding, an American friend and his fiancée, who was Russian but lived in America, educated in America. We'd gone for a wedding. We were at the Metropole Hotel right on Red Square. We followed all the travel advisories. I'd been there a few times before. We were doing all the safe things in the safe places, being tourists right in Red Square where the Kremlin is, GUM department store and whatnot. So, we were in a safe place doing safe things. And for some reason, the FSB set up an operation, which would have been approved at the top. Because in Russian society, lower level people don't just do things on initiative. So this would have been something that came down from the top to grab an American to use for an exchange purpose.
Do you believe Paul Whelan could have been anybody, or is there anything about you that made you attractive to them?
Well, I don't know why I would have been any more attractive than anyone else who had been in law enforcement or the military, who traveled abroad, worked in the security world, things like that. There's nothing in my background to do with intelligence or espionage. There's nothing that would have stuck out as me being a big catch. The funny thing is that when I was arrested, the FSB guys that arrested me said I was a brigadier general and a secret agent for the Defense Intelligence Agency. And that's the story that they'd been given. And so, I chuckled and blew it off, but that's seriously what they had believed. They figured out after a while that it wasn't true. But that was the narrative that we had a lot of trouble with, because the Russians obviously wouldn't back down from that.
When did you stop chuckling and realize that this could be the end?
Well, I have a pretty jovial personality, and even when I was arrested, I was talking back and forth with the FSB through a translator, because I don't speak Russian. The Russian I know now is prison level Russian, which isn't very polite. But I'm speaking with these Russian FSB guys. They're young, and we're going back and forth, and they're telling me, "Hey, this will be worked out with a political solution. It's just a matter of time." And they brought up the case of Danilov from 1986, which took 3 weeks. I think they thought that this would be something they could wrap up in a few weeks, and that, I'd be home and I wouldn't have to, sit in Lefortovo prison for a while. It turned out tremendously different.
When did that hit you, that I'm not going home? I don't know if I'm ever going home. And what was that like?
Well, I knew that I was going home at some point. I didn't know how long it would take. At first, the Russians wanted 3 people back. Then when Krasikov was arrested in Germany in 2019, the Russians said, "Hey, don't worry about these other 3. We want Krasikov. We'll trade Paul for Vadim." I knew that was a bit of a long shot. Number one, the Germans had Krasikov, and he was an assassin. Yeah, I was a tourist. The narrative that we were following, I was a tourist, he was an assassin, it didn't equal up. When Trevor Reed was arrested and exchanged, and then Brittany Griner was arrested and exchanged, that changed things a little bit. And then the one person that was arrested for espionage that the Americans held, they sent back after 18 months, which surprised everyone. And, to this day, we still don't know why they did it. I never gave up hope that I would be brought home. I knew that my 4 countries were trying to get me home. Everyone realized, that I wasn't a spy and that I was just being held hostage. And unfortunately, this is the problem of hostage diplomacy.
What was life like for you there?
It was bad. Lefortovo prison, they call it the shooting gallery. That's where they used to, and I think still do, shoot Russian citizens. It's not a nice place. You're in a cell 9 square meters by yourself. You don't really have very many comforts. I did have the 4 governments, the 4 consulars, officers, and ambassadors coming to visit me quite regularly. That wasn't bad for the first year and a half, but it is taxing. You're in a small space by yourself.
Wait a minute, a year and a half. You can't just say a year and a half, like, you did 6 hours. I mean, anybody who's ever been in a jail for 5 minutes, it's an immediate feeling of being in a different world and being obviously under threat. And that's here in America, like in the local community lockup because you got a DUI or something stupid like that. This was heavy. What was the day? What was the routine for you?
Well, one of the problems I had is I didn't understand the language. So I didn't know what the guards were going to do. I didn't know if they would treat me well or if they'd treat me badly. The power used to go out all the time. And I used to, when the power went out, go under my bed, because if the power went out so the guards could rush into my cell and beat me up, in the dark without the cameras catching it, I would be protected. It sounds silly now, but at the time I was like, well, why do the lights go off all the time? They've got cameras in the cell. The lights stay on 24 hours a day, except when they have these power outages. So what is happening? Are they targeting somebody else? Are they going to target me? So, there were things that I had to do to protect myself. It's not fun being in a cell by yourself. It's not fun not being able to hear your own language and to have people watching you through cameras, 24/7, to have a light on all night long so you can't sleep properly. The food that you're given is substandard. Luckily at Lefortovo, for that first year and a half, I had food coming in from the consulates. But the Russians denied medical care. I had a hernia problem. The Russians wouldn't let me have surgery, and it ended up being an emergency strangulation. I had to go to the hospital in the middle of the night. And, here I was, with the FSB and prison guards going to a hospital in an ambulance at a Russian hospital, having surgery in Russia with people that didn't speak English, that weren't explaining what was happening. And then the conditions in the operating room were, like MASH. I mean, it was just meatball surgery. It was unbelievable. I kind of laugh it off a little bit now, but, that still leaves a searing impression in my mind, just how bad the conditions were.
Somebody remarked to me when I said that I was talking to you, they're like, yeah, that guy doesn't seem broken enough for what he went through. You do have almost a preternatural calm to you. It must have been a very helpful survival tool, but where does that come from?
My parents are resilient. They were small children during World War II, growing up in England. The Germans bombed their homes, their cities. They had to put up with that sort of thing when they were young. And growing up, I kind of took on the same persona, just being patient, being resilient. It helped, through different careers and whatnot. And I knew that yelling and screaming and going mad or going out of control with the Russians wasn't going to help. I had to stay calm. When I went to court, I had to be in control. And I had to use whatever opportunity, like going to court and the perp walk they always put me through, to my advantage. And I did. I was able to pass notes to the consular officers. I passed documents and information to reporters during the perp walks. When I was in court, I was able to say a lot of things to the consular officers and reporters that the Russians didn't really figure out that I was doing until later on, and they weren't happy with me. But yeah, there's part of me that's broken, and it's going to take a long time for that to be mended.
What was the harshest part of the treatment? Did they physically abuse you? Were other prisoners coming after you? What was the hardest part?
So the first year and a half, I was by myself, and then I was moved to a labor camp. And these are the old, Soviet gulags. They were built in the 30s and 40s. Mine was actually improved by German prisoners of war. The place is hideous. I mean, nothing works. Everything's broken. We have cold water. It's really irony. It's horrible to have to drink or wash with. The saving grace actually was the war in Ukraine, because all the Russian prisoners from the camp went to the war, and those left were Tajik, Uzbek, Kyrgyz, Central Asian kids. Many of them in their early 20s, many there for just minor drug offenses.
The Ukraine war created a situation where a lot of the Russian prisoners were taken out. Now, that's very interesting. So you can confirm for the audience that it is true that Russia did empty the jails in order to create a fighting force. How do you know?
They did, because people that I knew, Russian citizens as well as Tajik and Uzbek citizens, went from my prison to the war. We had illegal burner phones, and so we were actually communicating with them on the front lines.
Who's we?
Me and other prisoners at the camp.
So were these like good guys, bad guys, or just anybody? And did they have a choice? Was it, you want to stay here or do you want to go fight? How'd it work?
Most of them were either career criminals who had been locked up many, many times and saw the war as a fleeting chance at freedom. And then the rest were young kids who had long sentences for maybe possession of an ounce of marijuana. The drug laws in Russia are really draconian. And because the prisons are labor camps, they have to keep the prisons full so that they get this free labor. So these kids were saying, well, if I go to war for 6 months, I could survive, and then I go home. That was the thinking. They weren't going because they had some ideological view of Putin as some master and Russia being superior. They just wanted to go home.
Did they try to hurt you, the prisoners there? How did they view you as an American spy?
That's the funny thing, is when I first got there, I wasn't sure how I'd be received. The Russians said, well, you may not be a spy. We don't know what you are, but you are something, because, we've been told not to touch you. We've been told to help you in any way we can and, not make trouble. The Tajiks and Uzbeks, the same way. They're just like, look, if you're a spy against Russia, that's great. If you're not, well, you're in the same boat we are. So, we're all allied, in being prisoners of Putin's Russia. So I didn't really have any trouble. There are issues in prisons all over the world, mental health concerns. Some people are there because they have mental health concerns and they've committed crimes. Others aren't happy because they're in intolerable situations. And you have to deal with that. The Central Asians are a little bit different than we are. The Russians are a little bit different than we are. So you had different cultural, religious values, societal, socioeconomic values. And these are all things that come into play, some negative, some positive. But for the most part, I got along well with people. One of the nice things for all the prisoners was that I had 4 ambassadors coming to visit. And I'm in a remote little place called Mordovia. I'm out in the middle of nowhere. And these ambassadors are coming from Moscow, and they're speaking with the Russian foreign minister and foreign ministry. And that impressed people. And it gave a lot of oversight to the camp. And it calmed down some of the corruption and some of the problems that we had been having with the guards when I first arrived. I will say that I helped and worked with the FSB at the camp to have 2 wardens and a deputy warden arrested and put in prison because their corruption was so bad that even the FSB said, yeah, this is over the top.
So you took an interest in what was happening at the prison when you were there trying to get yourself out?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're a weird guy, Paul. You're a little bit weird. You have some eccentricities that probably helped you survive in that. I think you're a little different than the rest of us. It doesn't mean that you were rightfully detained, but I think you had some personal characteristics going for you. So just take us through a TikTok of what the normal day was there.
In Lefordova in Moscow was really boring. You're up at 6, you have 3 meals provided through a slot in the door. You're sitting there reading books, writing letters. There was a TV I could watch a few Russian propaganda channels. They were obviously in Russian. And then at 10 p.m. we went to sleep. If during the day the ambassadors came to visit me, I'd go to a meeting room and see them. If the FSB wanted to talk to me, I'd go to their offices and speak with them. We were allowed 1 shower a week. Sheets were changed once a week, that sort of thing. Pretty boring. And after a while, the walls start to close in on you. So, 9 square meters, it might not sound too bad, but day in and day out, it wasn't great. And then at night in Lefordova, they left the light on, so it was difficult to sleep. At the prison camp, like I said, it's a labor camp, and they want labor. So we're up at 6. We're in the factory. We're working in the factory 6 days a week, sometimes 7. And then we'd go to bed at 10. And during the day, we'd get 3 meals. They were very, very bad meals. We were really relying on the food that came in from family, friends, my consulates, and things like that, as well as, what we could get at the shop.
What was the work at the factory?
Well, interestingly enough, it wasn't too bad. We made insulated coats and trousers for utility workers and military. So airport runway workers, postmen, railway workers, things like that. I did buttons and buttonholes. So I had 2 machines. And for some reason, even though we did 150 coats every day, I could never get the buttons and buttonholes to line up.
Was that on purpose?
Of course. Some of the other prisoners would sabotage, the sleeves or the cuffs or whatever. So, everything we produced looked pretty bad. It really did. But nobody seemed to care. And that was the other thing is, after years of doing this, we thought somebody would say something and people would laugh and say, no, this is Russia. They don't care. So, but I left my mark on Russian society.
Support for the Chris Cuomo Project comes from Cozy Earth. I like Cozy Earth. I like their sheets. I like the softness. I like how they hold up. I love the sustainability concept with them using viscose bamboo. And I think that's very cool. It makes me feel like I'm being responsible as well as being reasonable. Why? Because the price is great. They have this ridiculous guarantee at Cozy Earth where if you don't like it, you return it and you can use it for like 100 nights before that. Like, I don't even know that my sheets usually make it 100 nights. But now I know that basically I have a built-in proposition of no lose. Surprise your Valentine. Love them up with Cozy Earth. You can get up to 40% off at CozyEarth.com/Chris with my code Chris. That's CozyEarth.com/Chris. That's a great deal, 40% off, by the way. I don't get it. I should use my own code. And don't forget, if you're asked in a post-purchase survey, tell them you heard about Cozy Earth from me, Chris Cuomo on the Chris Cuomo Project. Support for the Chris Cuomo Project comes from iRestore. We're in the new year, but everybody always needs a fresh start. This February, how about self-love? How about trying to do something that may help you look and feel better? Now, I thought that iRestore Elite was like another red light gadget, and I'm not really a believer. But then I did my research. iRestore Elite has an FDA-cleared laser cap that has clinical results that suggest proven hair regrowth. I gotta tell you, when I first took it out, I thought it was like a bicycle helmet. And I thought it was gonna be a little weird, but you know what, I'm alone a lot. And I put the helmet on, I wear it, and there are different program times and what you do it for. And it's been really easy. There's certainly absolutely no downside. And I'll tell you what, it's a lot less expensive than a lot of the other stuff that's come through my house that's supposed to help me keep my hair. Give yourself the gift of a chance at looking better and feeling better. For a limited time only, our listeners get $625 off their iRestore Elite when you use the code Chris at iRestoreLaser.com. At $625 off the iRestore Elite at the iRestoreLaser.com site. Okay, use the promo code Chris. I really hope you use the promo code and check it out because it supports the show, and telling them that we sent you helps me keep my relationship with iRestore, and that matters to me. Hair loss is frustrating. You don't have to fight it alone, thanks to iRestore. When you say after a year and a half, the first year and a half, what changed after the first year and a half?
Well, I was actually convicted. We went through the court process, and I was convicted. The judge told me at sentencing that I'd be home in 2 weeks, that a deal would be reached and I'd be home in 2 weeks, not to worry. Of course, that didn't happen. I was sent to the labor camp, and that was partly to put pressure on my governments to reach a deal. So, the last 4 years I was at this labor camp, it was a shock. I mean, being in prison, being locked up, not being able to make your own decisions and live your own life, things like that. It does wear on you. So, when your friend says that I don't look broken enough, yeah, trust me, I am.
Well, it's a compliment that, you really were able to sustain yourself in such a horrible set of conditions. And then you had these flashpoints like Brittany Griner. She gets taken for weed or whatever it was. And then there's this huge push to get her back, and she gets back home way before you. What was that like? How aware were you of the Griner situation, and what was its impact on you emotionally and psychologically?
So one of the things at La Fortiva, they left the light on 24 hours a day. So, it was hard to sleep. At the labor camp, they would come to my bed every night, and every 2 hours, they'd wake me up, take my picture to make sure I hadn't escaped. So, we're talking that for 4 years, every night, every 2 hours, they'd come and wake me up. So I wasn't sleeping well, and that has an impact. So when the situation with Trevor Reed came up, that he was being transferred back, that had an impact. And then, we knew about Krasikov being in German hands and that the Russians wanted to trade him for me. We were hoping that a deal would be done with Krasikov and the Merchant of Death that was traded for Brittany. We thought there would be a deal put together. And then, it turned out there was a deal, but it didn't include me and it didn't include Krasikov. That was a low point, an extremely low point, because I realized that the U.S. had nothing left to bargain with. They'd given up their bargaining position. Roger Carstens, the special presidential envoy for hostage affairs, and I had been in touch. I'd spoken to him regularly from prison on these, illegal burner phones. I was in touch with the State Department and other agencies within the U.S. government. I knew the basics of what was happening. And, I was led to believe a few times that, I just needed to pack my bags and wait because I'd be home soon. And, at the 4-year mark, when Brittany went home, I wasn't too happy. I mean, she was there 10 months. It's not her fault that, things worked out the way they did. I was glad that she went home. Even her being there 10 months was 10 months too long. Trevor, he was there more than 3 years. He shouldn't have been there locked up at all. But there I was, and it was 4 years. And, as you say, it's, this kind of thing wears on you. And this is what breaks people down. I had telephone calls with Secretary Blinken from prison. I had the communication that I could, communication that other prisoners in other countries never had. So I was actually fairly well informed. I couldn't be told everything, but I was told the bare bones. The Russians kept changing the goalposts.
Do you think that America took care of you? Do you think that our government did what they were supposed to do with you, or are you disappointed?
They did take care of me. Roger Carstens, Antony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor, Bill Burns, CIA Director. Those guys made it a mission to get me home. And they did. It just took a little while.
Well, how did you explain to yourself, or how did you understand Brittany Griner getting back before you?
It was the deal with Krasikov. The Russians wanted Krasikov. They weren't going to give me up until they got Krasikov as part of a deal. The U.S. said, we can't trade Krasikov because the Germans have him. And that kind of put my trade on one side while they dealt with getting Brittany back. What I was told was the decision was made to get one American back versus no American. And I support that. I just wish I had been the American that came home.
Yeah, I don't get but I don't understand why you weren't. Like, why was there this hard and fast understanding that you for Krasikov and why Griner was easier to get? Were you suspicious that there were motivations on the American side, that she was somehow more desirable to get back because of the media profile?
I'm sure that played into it, yeah. She was only there 10 months. Even, Trevor was there more than 3 years. I don't know who made all the decisions. I know the people that were involved, they were involved in my return. I can't hold anything against them, but, I was there an awfully long time, and I don't think I should have been.
There were those during that situation who were like, so Griner is a black female and a lesbian, and she checks all these boxes of diversity and wokeness, and that's what's going on. And Whelan's just a white guy. So he's a victim of circumstance of what was of cultural importance to the left when they were in power. You buy any of that?
I'm sure that entered into the conversation. At the time, I knew nothing about any of that. I only knew about the Krasikov piece. It did surprise me when the Merchant of Death was sent back to Russia for someone who was there on a minor charge. But again, the Russians had the keys. They had us locked up. They were the ones that were making the decisions as to who would be traded and who wouldn't. The decisions in Washington, the political animus, who was saying what and who was doing what. I really don't know of the details at this point. I do know that Brittany's stature as a WNBA player helped with media attention. The president had a phone call with her family and had her family at the White House long before he would get on the phone with my family and have my family at the White House. That was quickly resolved after Brittany's release. But these are the things that stick in the back of my mind. Why wasn't my family afforded that same level of contact from the White House and high-level people from the start? And why did it take, the media getting involved to kind of kick things into motion? As I said, the people at the top got me home. It took a long time. The media helped tremendously. And that's, part of my story. But it was 5 years, 7 months, and 5 days of my life that I can't get back. And the only reason that I was held was because I was an American citizen. I hadn't done anything. I wasn't drunk and disorderly. I didn't take dope to Russia. I didn't commit any crimes. I went as a tourist and, walked into a situation that the Russians had planned. It was very difficult to kind of come to terms and put those pieces of the puzzle together. And still, some of that I just have to walk away from and get on with life. I can't worry about it.
How did you sustain your hope when you were in there? What kind of devices did you use? Were you just leaning on your brother and sister? Did you make plans? How did you keep yourself motivated?
Well, every day I got up and I sang quite loudly and quite badly the national anthems of my 4 countries. And I did that from day one to the last day. At the labor camp, the Tajiks, Uzbeks, and Kyrgyz, they'd sing along with me, singing their national anthems. And, I don't sing very well. I know the words, but I don't sing very well. So, I did that kind of as an act of defiance every day. And it went on from there. If there was something that I could do in defiance at La Fortiva or, with the FSB or at the camp, I would. I didn't go out of my way to endanger anybody or make anyone's life really miserable. But, if there was a rule that they weren't following that would benefit me, I made sure they followed it. I was supposed to have mail. So, I pressed the point. I was allowed to have English books. I pressed the point. I would write letters and complaints and speak with the local prosecutor. And the local FSB guys at the labor camp, they would come and say, look, Paul, if you have problems, talk to us. We don't need you telling your ambassador that there's something wrong at the camp. And then, the foreign ministry gets a call, and then the prison service gets a call, and then the FSB gets a call, and then somebody, unloads on us. So you tell us if there's a problem and we'll come and fix it for you. And for the most part, they did. Like I said, 2 wardens put in prison, 1 deputy warden put in prison. I mean, that's the kind of thing that my fellow prisoners couldn't get to occur. So, I mean, those were the things that I would fight. I was a little bit of a rabble rouser, a man of the people, I would call it. But if there was something untoward going on, I'd bring it up. And if we couldn't get it resolved locally, then, I would tell whoever I had to, including in international media.
How did you change?
I've always been fairly patient as a person, a little less tolerant of BS than maybe other people might. I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. It's a multicultural, sort of liberal area. I was always more conservative than, the people I ran around with. I've now kind of changed a little bit in that I'm still very, very patient, but probably more patient than I had been. My tolerance levels for BS are higher than they used to be. And I just ignore a lot of the nonsense that I hear on TV and the radio. Unfortunately, when you're ignoring, what's happening in the world to an extent, you miss out on, what's happening in the world. But that's kind of a bit of a coping mechanism. I don't want to get wrapped up into politics. I don't want to get wrapped up in some of the things happening now because I've got my own life to fix. But, being resilient, sometimes means that you got to put your hand up and just say, look, enough. I'm not going to tolerate this nonsense.
What did you learn about Russians or about politics or about life?
Well, one of the things that I'd known for a long time from traveling the world, and, of course, I'm an immigrant. My parents are immigrants. People around the world are the same. They all want the same thing. They want a nice life. They want to have, a family. They want to have a nice home. They just want a peaceful existence. Very few people really want to go out there and cause trouble and ruin people's lives or ruin their countries or the world. There are some. Most of them are locked up in prison, hopefully. But, what I learned, with the Tajiks and Uzbeks and the Russians, we were all stuck in a situation, and there were pieces of each of us that were the same. Maybe the culture, the religion, the personalities and behaviors were a little bit different here and there. But I did figure out, and then I cemented the fact that people are the same and they do want the same out of life. And, it's the people like Putin or what's his name? Kim Jong-un, in North Korea. It's those sorts of people that ruin it for everybody else. They're the dictators that are holding everybody else back. The sanctions we have against Russia don't hurt Putin. They hurt the people who have kids in prison or just the normal run of the day, workers. The same in North Korea. We can have all kinds of sanctions against the guy in charge, but it's the people lower down that it hurts.
How did you avoid the violence that is always ascribed to Russian prisons?
Everyone knew that I was a high value and that, I wasn't to be touched. I wasn't to be extorted. I wasn't to have trouble. At first I had 2 minders, the 2 senior guys in the camp, looked out for me. There were some other prisoners that spoke English, that, a couple from Africa. We ended up with some Cubans and, some of the Central Asian guys spoke English. So they were able to kind of tell me how things worked and how things went. A lot of the violence that did occur, it would be between the Russians. and I would just stand back and watch. Some of the violence was between the different Muslim groups, the Chechens and the Tajiks. They didn't get along. And the Chechens are Russian citizens, but they didn't get along because they practice Islam differently. So, they had a few big brawls, and, that was between them. I only had one instance where a guy hit me, and that was over the U.S. support of Israel. And it was actually last November. The guy about my age reached over a table and hit me on the side of the face. He wasn't happy that the U.S. was helping Israel against Muslims in the Middle East. He was ranting and raving, and he reached over a table and hit me. Not the worst hit I've ever had in my life, but it showed that anything could happen in prison. Other prisoners grabbed that guy and they beat him up as a lesson. And people were apologizing to me. The guy was prosecuted for it, et cetera, et cetera. But it just it showed everyone that even though the FSB was in control of the camp, the camp leadership didn't want any problems with me. The guards didn't want problems with me. The senior prisoners didn't want problems with me. And I got along basically with everybody. If you had a loose cannon that wasn't aware of the situation, he could really cause an international incident.
Support for the Chris Cuomo Project comes from Factor. Okay, if you go to my Substack and join, you will become part of my wellness health reclamation program, and I am using Factor meals, and so far, so good. I've gotten rid of that first batch of bloat, inflammation. Why? Better food. Factor has all the nutritional information on the back. They balance sodium with protein and carbs with everything that you need in a way that will help you sustain my weight loss goals. How does Factor do that? They have chef-made gourmet meals that make the eating part easy. They're tasty. They're also dietitian approved, and they're easy. Ready to heat and eat in 2 minutes. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/Cuomo50off and use the code Cuomo50off, and guess what you'll get off? 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's the code Cuomo50off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Go to factormeals.com/Cuomo50off. That's how you get the deal. Support from the Chris Cuomo Project comes from Oracle. Even if you think it's a bit overhyped, AI is a real thing, and it's going to be in more and more places and having more and more of an impact. Self-driving cars, molecular medicine, getting answers on the internet, business efficiency. It's going to be the new modality. And if it's not in your industry yet, it's coming and fast. AI needs a lot of speed, needs a lot of computing power. So how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? Upgrade to the next generation of the cloud. Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, OCI. OCI is a blazing fast and secure platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, plus all your AI and machine learning workloads. OCI costs 50% less for compute and 80% less for networking. So you're going to save money. Thousands of businesses have already upgraded to OCI, including Vodafone, Thomson Reuters, and Suno AI. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. For new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitment, you can get a big savings. Now, this offer is going to end March 31st, so get in while you can. See if your company qualifies for this special offer. Just go to oracle.com/CCP. Oracle.com/CCP. Tell us about when you learned it is going to happen. There's going to be a deal, and they say I'm part of it this time. Did you believe it? How did you learn? Take us through it.
I had some phone calls with people at home, including, in Ottawa and in London especially. And I knew that there were negotiations for the German release of Krasikov. And the British and the Canadians were involved with speaking with the Germans and helping the American side get Krasikov. The U.S. had, when Brittany was released, basically said, okay, Russia, we don't agree with your narrative about Paul. He's not a general. He's not a secret agent. He doesn't work for DIA. But, we'll go with it for the purposes of negotiation. So, for Paul, you want Krasikov. And then, throw in that Evan Gershkovich was arrested for espionage, too, to sweeten the deal. I knew that something was afoot. I'd spoken with Secretary Blinken on the phone. I'd spoken with some others in Washington, Ottawa, and London, and my hopes were up. Now, obviously, you prepare for the best and expect the worst, right? Or expect the best and prepare for the worst, right? It's the coin that has one side on each. I had an inkling from the FSB that something was afoot. Two young guys turned up at the camp. They wanted me to write a pardon letter to President Putin. And I kind of chuckled like, yeah, okay, whatever. I said, I can't do that in Russian. Someone would have to translate it. It would take time. And they said, no, here's a piece of paper and a pen. We don't care what language it's in. Write it in English. Just, it's for President Putin and that you want a pardon and just, give us some reasons why you should go home. I said, okay, whatever. And they said, no, Paul, right now we want it. The people in Moscow are waiting for it. We have to scan this and send it back. And I sat back and I remembered that Ambassador Carstens had told me that Brittany and Trevor had to do the same thing, write these letters of pardon. And that was soon before they were released. So I said, okay. So I wrote out the letter of pardon and then started making some phone calls. And, nobody would tell me that my release was imminent, but they did say, hey, just, be prepared, get ready. I called my parents and said, if you don't hear from me for a few days, it could be a good thing. Don't panic. Stay in touch with the consulate and the hostage affairs team in State Department. And it was actually the next morning the FSB came and they said, hey, Paul, you're going to the hospital. And I said, oh, really? I'm going to the hospital, right? And they said, yeah. And I said, okay, so what should I take? And they said, well, take everything that you want. And, usually when you go to the hospital, you take one bag with just a few things. So I said, okay. So I went, back to the barrack with a couple of guys and I'd had most of my things prepared, books in a bag, other things that I would have to take with me. I gave most of my stuff to friends at the camp and brought a couple bags and loaded them up in a FSB vehicle. And we drove the 10 hours back to Moscow. Now, I got to Lefortovo and most of the people that I encountered were the people that had been there previously 4 years ago. So they knew me to some extent. A couple spoke English fairly well. And as soon as I got there, they kind of nodded and, acknowledgement. And they all went like this. This was something that the Russians would always do. Now, in the U.S. military, this means, kind of huddle up, rally, huddle up. In Russia, if they do this, it means that somebody's listening. There are listening devices, hidden somewhere. So they kept doing that. They wouldn't, we would go like this, right? They would go like this. So I knew what was happening. And so finally, I got to a corner of Lefortovo, and one of the officers said, hey, do you know why you're here? And I said, I think I'm going home. And he said, yeah, you are. But he's like, hey, just, don't say anything. Be quiet. You're going to be in a solitary cell for 5 days. And, then you'll probably, go home. I said, okay. So I was literally in a solitary cell. I didn't leave for exercise. I didn't leave this little cell for the 5-day period. And then on the 5th day, that same guard came back and he had a bag of my civilian clothes that, I'd had with me. They hadn't been washed in 5 years and they were all too big because I was so malnourished. And they said, hey, put some clothes on, you're going. And I said, okay. And they had some documents and things for me to sign. And I was like, cool, this is it. One of the guards told me that a couple of Americans had come in and they were talking about Evan and Alsu and that other prisoners had been brought in. And we were all taken individually out to a bus. And it was on the bus that I met Evan and Alsu, who came home with me. So yeah, it was quite a moment. So this was August 1st, Russian time. I was still a little bit leery that something could go wrong, that there could be a problem, that, at the last minute, the Russians might yank us back and say, look, America, we want more, for this exchange. But there were plenty of people on the bus. There was 16 of us, I think, total. And the people that I was sitting next to were German Russians, or just, German Bulgarian, German Romanians who had been in Russia. They were people that were either allied with Navalny or had done something minor and been caught up in, the Russian machinations. And, we weren't sure where we were going. We knew we couldn't fly over Ukraine, so we weren't going to fly to Europe necessarily. We didn't know if we'd maybe go to, to Doha, go to Qatar, something like that. But we drove to an airport. We got on a Russian foreign ministry plane, and it wasn't until we were wheels up and we were out of Russian airspace that we all kind of looked at each other and said, yeah, this is actually happening. So
how did it hit you?
I try to be a realist as much as possible. And I knew in the back of my mind that things could go wrong, that, we could be turned around and sent back. You just never knew. But it gave me a lot of hope. And I was quite pleased at what was happening. But again, I was a little bit reserved. And to be quite honest, it wasn't until after we'd done the exchange and we were flying back, to our hemisphere that, we hit the White Cliffs of Dover. And that was the point when I realized that, I was back in friendly territory.
How often do you remember that moment?
Quite often. Yeah.
What do you think the toughest part was for you emotionally?
Knowing what the whole debacle was doing to my parents. They're in the mid-'80s. They'd been through a lot early on in life. They had a fairly nice, calm, quiet life. I ran around the world. They'd done a lot of world traveling themselves, but I ran around the world for work and whatnot. But I always came home. My cat and dog died while I was gone. My parents had done a lot to keep my dog alive, especially. But, she was 14 and she'd had a good life. And, it was good age for a golden retriever. But that was really difficult. That was difficult on my parents because, we had thought that I would be home, to see my cat and my dog again. And it was that sort of realization that the home I was going back to wasn't the home that I left. And, there were other things. I wasn't going back to my job. I wasn't going back to my home. I wasn't going back to, my old car. All these things were gone. And, that weighs heavily on your mind because you're thinking, well, this isn't the life that I left. And this has all been taken away from me by the Russians. And then, my parents were dealing with that same sort of thing, knowing that I was coming back to a life that was fractured and needed to be put back together.
Do you hate the Russians?
No, I hate Putin. It's Putin and the people that he's got in place at the top. The Russians really live pretty badly. When you see the third world conditions in Russia, you see how bad things are outside of St. Petersburg and Moscow. You see just how bad it is for them. And it's partly their fault because they won't rise up, and they need to. There needs to be another rebellion, another revolution in Russia. They need to get rid of Putin and all the old KGB hacks. They just need to wipe out all of the people in charge and start again. They're responsible for that, but I can't hate the people for what happened to me because the people that did it are Putin and the people in charge of the FSB and Sergei Lavrov. He's the foreign minister.
When you don't want to, you don't have any need to indulge in politics, but when you're monitoring what's happening in America, and there has definitely been a shift on the political right that is sympathetic to Putin and the Russian cause now, which I would have never imagined happening. Maybe on the left, maybe some kind of commie for commie thing. But
yeah.
What does that mean to you when you hear how, because of the Ukraine conflict and Trump and Zelensky or whatever, people talk about Putin like maybe he's acting in the right?
Well, anyone who says that needs their head examined, because if you look at what he's been doing for the last 20 couple of years that he's been in power, all he's done is keep his people down. You look at the wars in Chechnya, you look at what he's done in Dagestan, you look at what he's done, just the hazing and the problems in the military. It's cutthroat at every level. The pensions there are nothing. The economy is horrible. Outside Moscow and St. Petersburg, like I said, it's a third world country. Anyone who thinks that the Russians have it better than we do, or that their system of government is better than ours, needs to go over there and take a look. It's horrible. And Putin is a dictator. I mean, I knew that before I went to Russia, but Putin's a dictator. And until him and the other people in charge, the Siloviki, and the people who own everything, the oligarchs, until they're gone, there can't be a modern Russia. There just can't.
What has been the best and the worst of being back home?
Well, the best is just having freedom. If I want a Chips Ahoy cookie, I can eat it. If I want to go to Subway and have a Subway, I can do that. I can drive around and see friends and family. I can talk on the phone. I can get up when I want and go to sleep when I want. There's still chores and things I have to do, and my parents have things that I take care of for them. That's been the good part. The bad part, and one of the things that I'm working on with Congress and community leaders, is that once people like me, hostages, get off the plane, that's it. The government's like, okay, go home. Good luck. There is no social safety net for us. There is no compensation. There is in the Hostage Recovery Act a provision that we're supposed to be taken care of for 5 years with medical, dental, optical, psychological type benefits. But the government never funded it. And Congress is like, hey, there's a 5-year provision in the Hostage Recovery Act to take care of you. And I said, yeah, but you never gave it any money. So the State Department can't do anything. And so, Debbie Dingell and Haley Stevens, my congresswomen, they're trying to take care of that right now. And there's actually a lot of people in Congress that are looking out for hostages. But, in Michigan, I don't qualify for unemployment benefits. There's no social safety net for people like me. I'm actually living off a GoFundMe account and, the help of people in my community. I'll eventually go back to a full-time job, but after being held hostage for 5.5 years, it takes a little bit longer than 4 months to kind of get back into the right frame of mind to sit in an office and have a normal job and to do things like that.
How often do you wake up and think you're in prison?
That's happened before, especially when I first got back to the States. I was in Texas at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio. And I would wake up in the middle of the night. I was on the wrong time zone. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, not really understanding where I was. And it was dark. And I was used to lights being on all the time. So, that's happened a few times at home. I've woken up and, I've had to look around and just kind of, check myself to make sure that I am, awake and at home and not asleep and in prison. But yeah, these are the things. This is the reality that, you don't just get off a plane and then go back to normal life. And, having an income is important. That's why we're looking for compensation. But, medical, dental benefits, things like that are important. Every one of us, Brittany, Trevor, the guys that have just come back from China, the ones that came back from Venezuela and Iran a few months back, they've all been through a traumatic experience of one sort or another. And this is where PTSD plays in. And, unfortunate for me, my employer cut me loose fairly early on. So I came back without a job, so no income, no medical benefits, things like that, no insurance. And others have been in the same boat. So, we're really looking for Congress to fund the Hostage Recovery Act, the way it's written. And, we're working with congressional members to work in some sort of compensation for those like me who were held just because we were American citizens for, some sort of diplomatic reason.
What do you want to do with your life that you wouldn't have done before?
Well, I have to make a difference. A lot of people in the government, in Washington, in Ottawa, in Dublin, in London, they work tirelessly to get me out. Some of those people, I'll never know their names and I'll never meet them. There were people in my local community that took care of my parents while I was gone. There were people all over the country that wrote letters, especially after Brittany was released. She asked people to write letters to me, and she did a lot of advocating on my behalf. Those are the people that made a difference to me. The media, I had a lot of contact with the media. The media really helped me in my cause. So, I can't just go into retirement. I want to write a book. I'm working on that. I'm working with Congress to make sure that, the aftercare for hostages is better when others come home. But I need to look at, how can I make a difference? How can we work on deterring this hostage diplomacy? How can we better work on recovering people? But then the aftercare piece, and making sure that when people come home, they are taken care of properly and their families are taken care of properly. Because it's a big deal to be held hostage. It's not like on TV. It's not like on TV. And, I might not look like I'm totally broken, but, there are pieces that are chipped and, they've got to be put back in place and that glue's got to set. And it's going to take time. So it's, the reintegration, we call it, is a process.
Well, Brother Paul, I am here for it. You got a book? I'll blow it up. You want to come on TV? You text me, and the answer is yes. If there's something that you want me to cover that is relevant to you and others like you, I'm a text away, and the story's going to be on the air. Whatever I can do to help, you deserve it, and you have my respect and my appreciation. I am so impressed by how you handled yourself. I could have never done it.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. One of the things I'd mentioned, the GoFundMe account, I use that personally, but I'm also using that for my trips to DC to advocate on behalf of people that are being held right now. I'm using that for trips to New York to talk to the UN about this issue of arbitrary detention. So, if you could, get the GoFundMe out and let people know that it will be on the bottom of
this screen the entire time of the podcast.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I'll be back in Washington on the 23rd of January, and I'm meeting with people at the State Department, as well as going to the International Spy Museum for an event. But it's anytime I can get to New York or get to DC and speak to Congress people, I'm doing it. And this issue of hostage diplomacy, arbitrary detention, I'm gonna bird dog it until it just goes away.
Well, thank you for representing our country so well in such a horrible set of circumstances and showing us for the best of ourselves to people who are acting like the worst of themselves. And you want to come on? I'm a call away. And I'll help any way I can. And I'm really, really happy to meet you and see you at home in the United States of America.
Well, I've watched you for years. I mean, for decades.
I'm big in Russian prisons.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, there was a gap that I couldn't follow you too much.
Believe me, you missed nothing that was worth paying attention to. I promise you that.
Okay. Well, I certainly knew who you were. So when I got the message, hey, do you want to, do a podcast with this guy? I was like, absolutely. Absolutely. So I really appreciate you having me on and for the support.
I still can't get over his state of calm, his ability to balance. I mean, he's like the ultimate stoic, this man. What an amazing gift his disposition was, his mental strength, his psychological strength to survive what I don't know how many would survive the way he did in those circumstances for that long, years. Amazing. I hope you appreciated hearing from Paul Whelan. I meant what I said. He needs help. He deserves our respect and our appreciation. And I am a call away, and we will continue our coverage of his situation. He's home, but he's certainly not healed. Thank you very much for subscribing, for following here at the Chris Cuomo Project. Appreciate you. See you on News Nation, 8 p. Eastern every weekday night. Always good to have you. You a critical thinker? You an independent? You a free agent? Are you free? You control your own mind, your own beliefs? Good. Wear it. Wear your independence. Check out the free agent gear. We'll use the money to give to good causes. All right? My friends, the problems are real. Let's get after it.